Okay, so Ruth's had her one day off, Christmas Day. So now we're on to chapter 39. 2 days later, Sarah had me go with her to the fish market. Her back was hurting her fierce, and I was to carry the cod and halibut needed for a fish chowder. The market was crowded with folk whose cupboards had been cleaned out by the Christmas feasting, and Sarah muttered rude things. Her growing discomfort had put her in a constant temper. The cod was easy enough to purchase, but stall after stall turned up no halibut. Sarah insisted that haddock or catfish would not do, so we marched on. The air was thick with the cries of the stall owners, promising the juiciest fish, the freshest fish, and fish fit for the king himself. Before dawn, I had made the trip to the Tea-Water Pump, but I had not dared visit the prison or Captain Morse's tavern. I was still confuddled about what to do. My thoughts wandered. I did not realize that Sarah had moved ahead of me in the crowd until a great shout went up. An oyster seller's cart had overturned in front of the carp stall, and the two men were hollering at each other. The crowd halted, and I had no place to turn. Sarah's white cloth cap bobbed away in the distance as I looked for a path out of the crowd, but bodies pushed in from all sides to watch the two men arguing. When a hand grabbed my arm, I gasped. "Apologies, just Sal," Captain Morse said as he released me. His eyes were tired, but his cheeks were flushed. My mouth gaped open like that of a fish breathing its last. I shook my head. He couldn't talk to me in view of everyone. There was no mistaking what he was, dressed in the brown and white coat. I turned first one way, then the other, but bodies were packed around me so tight as could be. Captain Morse kept his eyes on the arguing men, but leaned his face close enough to mine that I could hear him whisper, "We must talk." Sarah had realized I was no longer with her. Her cap stopped and then slowly started back toward us. Her husband was a British gunner. If she saw me talking to a rebel officer... "Go away," I muttered. "I have news for my men." The oyster seller picked up a carp and shook it in another man's face. The crowd laughed. Sarah plowed toward me. "I beg your pardon," Morse whispered. "Please." Soldiers appeared on the edge of the crowd to restore order. "Come up to the tavern." Yes, I told the captain. "I'll come this afternoon. Now go away." The crowd melted under the eyes of the armed soldiers. The carp seller, you probably know carp is a kind of fish. The carp seller was explaining the ruckus to a sergeant, while the oyster seller reloaded his cart. Sarah kicked oysters out of her way as she approached. "Where in the name of all that's holy did you get to?" she asked. "I was trapped in the crowd," I said. "I called, but you could not hear me." She grunted and handed me a small fish with glassy eyes. "This will have to do. Halibut is rare as hen's teeth today." I settled it in the basket atop the fat cod and followed Sarah as she headed away from the market. We walked in silence for a few blocks, her concentrating on her huffing and puffing, me trying to figure out if I dared go up to the tavern. The sky promised more snow. How long would Dibdin wait before reclaiming Curzon's hat and blanket? We crossed the street. Miss Sarah, ma'am?" I asked, sweet as honey. "What is it?" I chose my words with care. "Has Madame Lockton said anything about me in your hearing?" She tilted her head a bit as she looked at me. "Aye, this morn, as a matter of fact. Said you wasn't allowed to go to that blasted water pump. Said I should send one of the other girls, even though the sun not be up at the time of day, even though the streets be covered in ice." Sarah reached for my elbow as we trod upon a slick patch of cobblestone. "But I like getting out," I said, "and I don't mind that chore." We reached a stretch where ashes had been thrown onto the ice and the going was safer. "I don't answer to her," Sarah said as she released my arm. "I answer to the King's army. I'd be right pleased if you kept fetching the water. Makes my life easier." She stopped and put her hands on her back, breathing heavily. Her baby belly was so big she could have loaded it in a wheelbarrow and pushed it in front of her. She caught me studying her and gave a quick smile. The baby will come soon, she said. It will be a joyous day, I said. I'll keep getting the water, but... But what? Could you please not tell Madam that I'm getting the water? Sarah stretched to one side and winced. What she don't know won't hurt her. It's not like she's up at that hour anyway. After the midday meal, I contrived to overturn the pitcher that held the tea water, dumping it on the floor. Clumsy dolt, Hannah scolded as I knelt to clean the floor with rags. Don't be looking at me to trudge up there and get more for her high mightness, Mary said from her chair by the window. She squinted and sewed another stitch. I've got to hem these breeches before the light fades. I'll run up and fetch it, I said. Double time, I promise. Sarah gave me a good hard stare, sensing she did not have the entire picture before. It's your neck, she finally said. Mind she don't see you leave. I near ran up to the Golden Hill Tavern, my raw blisters hurting with every step. Captain Morse was idling on the porch, smoking a pipe. He disappeared inside when he saw me, and was waiting in the alley when I reached it. Here, he handed me a loaf of bread. You made me come up here for a loaf of bread, I asked. Take it to Dibdin, he said, fighting a smile. There's a note baked inside. A note? It contains wondrous news. He looked ready to jump out of his skin. Washington has beaten them. Sir? He clenched his fists and unclenched them. On Christmas night, the general led a surprise attack on Trenton. He beat the Hessians, killed a handful, and took more than 900 prisoners. Are you sure? I thought someone told him a falsehood. The British officers I knew were confident the American army was falling apart. Positive, he said with a grin. Won't that make the British mad? I asked. I truly hope so. I hope the king is so upset he jumps up and down on his own crown. This war is not over, not by a long shot. I handed the bread back. I'll tell them the news, but I cannot pass a note. That could land me in jail. He shoved the loaf back at me. You are a serving girl, delivering a tavern loaf to the starving prisoners. You don't even know about the note. Why is it necessary? The men need to see my signature to know this is the truth. They have endured so much, Sal. Don't deprive them of this chance to celebrate. It will strengthen their spirits. I pulled up the hood of my cloak to hide my face as I approached the prison. The commons was filled with drilling soldiers, much more than usual. Their officers barked commands with urgency. The men marched grim-faced, swords flapping against their legs, rifles bouncing on their shoulders. Perhaps the captain's news was indeed the truth. I hurried behind the building to the right window. I stood on tiptoe and squished the loaf through the bars. Dibdin's face appeared at the window. There's a note inside, I whispered. Tear into it carefully. I ran away before he could answer, willing my feet to move faster. I had walked a block south when an enormous roar erupted from the prison. Hundreds of throats cheering, hooting, hollering, hundreds of hands clapping and feet stomping with joy. The noise was such that folks stopped what they were doing and ran out of doors to stare. The news spread from the prison as fast as it had spread from cell to cell. The rebels had attacked instead of running. The rebels had advanced instead of retreating. The rebels had won a battle. Folks could scarce credit it. So, looks like the rebels are doing better than we thought. All right, I'm going to start chapter 40, but I probably won't get to the end of it. Just after the new year came word of another shocking victory for the rebels, this one at Princeton in New Jersey. Washington's troops chased the British from the battlefield, killed a bunch of them, and took a couple of 100 prisoners. Folks could scarce credit this neither. Colonel Hawkins let out a roar in the study when the news was delivered and hit the unfortunate messenger on the head with a rolled-up map. Then he called for his horse and galloped off to headquarters. Within a day, the British promised boiled peas and rice with butter twice a week for their American prisoners. But they still did not allow fires in the Bridewell cells. The men had to eat their meat raw. The chamber pots froze solid at night. The master's trip to London was moved up so that he could deliver news of the setbacks to the Parliament and King. Madame had finally accommodated herself to the notion of his voyage and had found a way to turn it to her advantage. While we prepared Lockton's clothes for the journey, she wrote out long lists of items she wanted him to buy her in England. I kept to the kitchen and cellar and woodpile when she was awake, but made my trips up island each day before dawn, looking over my shoulder at every sound, choosing a different path each day. The constant worry ate a hole in my belly. Curzon was stronger and told me not to fret, for he was not coughing up blood and his bowels were in fine working order, but he always asked me to come back the next day. The day of the master's departure, I roused myself extra early on account of I feared Madame might do the same. I deposited stale rolls and burnt hunks of pork on the windowsill of Curzon's cell, then crossed the commons on my way to the pump. There were a few folk out on their own early morning errands, all bundled in cloaks and blanket coats and shawls and scarves wrapped up high. "You there!" a loud voice called out. Everyone stopped to look. "You there, girl!" Oh no! A British soldier hurried toward me. I relaxed some when I saw his face. It was the mountain-sized guard who had let me visit Curzon's cell when he was first imprisoned, the one who liked to eat. "Haven't seen you round," he said as he neared me. I bobbed quickly. "The rules don't allow civilians in the cells." He lowered his rifle to the ground and eyed my bucket. "True enough. What'd you bring him today?" Breadcrumbs and burnt meat, sir." He wrinkled his nose. "What about yesterday?" "Yesterday was kidney pie and stale almond cake, sir." He shook his head and licked his lips. "Sorry I missed that. I am. Wouldn't hurt to drop off a bite now and then to one such as myself, would it?" No, sir," I answered. "I shall remember that." He tilted his head to the side. "Your master ever hire you out?" 'Twas common in those days for folks to hire out their slaves to make money. The slaves did not see the money, of course, but if I had the chance to work away from the prying eyes of Madame, I'd be grateful for it. Yes, sir," I lied. We need a maid to clean out the cells. Dying men do puke out some terrible things, they do. You're a steadfast girl. Tell your mistress we'd pay her the going rate for your services." "I shall tell her, sir." He shouldered his rifle. "I'm on the night watch now. The name is Fisher. Bring me round some cake and I'll keep an eye on your brother." "Thank you, Mr. Fisher, sir. I shall." "No kidney pie, though. Kidneys sour my gut something terrible." All right, so this is the guy that she first met, and she's kind of building up a relationship with him. And if she brings him that cake, he's going to watch over her brother, also known as Curzon. Stay tuned.